everyone, and welcome to the session. So diversity, equity and inclusion has undoubtedly been a topic that has only gained more traction in the past several years. And in particular in 2020, thankfully, this has led to more awareness on the depth and breadth of DE&I as a whole. This has resulted in many different outcomes, one of which being businesses around the world bringing the conversation about DE&I to the forefront and, amongst other things, assessing how company culture can play a role in channeling a positive DE&I experience. My name is Janeffa Murphy and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at Five9. I'm an advocate for DE&I and I'm super excited to be joined by our CEO, Rowan Trollope, and Kelly McMillan, one of our global partner managers, to tell us more about how Five9 is helping build a more sustainable and impactful space for our teams as they engage in the workplace. So let's get started, and we'll get started with some intros. Rowan, over to you.
Thanks, Janeffa. I'm Rowan Trollope, and I'm the CEO of Five9.
Awesome. And Kelly?
Kelly McMillan, Global Partner Manager at Five9, supporting our partner community. And also, because representation matters, I'm the founder of Exposure, Inclusion, and Diversity Council, a business resource group here in the Technology Services channel.
Wonderful. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to get right into the questions. So, Rowan, I'm going to go to you first. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why Five9 began to think about DE&I strategy, and what do you hope to accomplish with Five9's approach?
Yeah, great question. I think first and foremost, I'm not sure that I would characterize what we've had in the beginning anyways as a DE&I strategy. That's something that's still evolving at Five9 and that we're building on. But to kind of back up a little bit and give you a baseline, Five9's culture, I think as a starting place, gave us a really good place to sort of jump off from, in that it's a really collaborative culture, very tolerant and accepting of different views. And I think that while that's a great start, it also in a way kind of gave us a little bit of a false sense of security when it came to DE&I, because at least, if you're working in an environment where people aren't complaining about those issues and generally feel like the culture is accepting and great, well, you may not sort of realize that, hey, there's actually more that you could do. And that is something that we realized last year, that while we had a good culture as a foundation, we needed to really think more and more deeply about how we could be more thoughtful and deliberate about DE&I. And one of the things that happened throughout the course of the last year is that we kicked off that initiative, but it started from a grassroots perspective. When I thought about this process of a DE&I strategy, as a CEO, the first thing that comes to mind is we're going to put in place a DE&I strategy and we're going to assign someone who's responsible, and it kind of goes tops down. What happened at Five9 over the last year is the opposite of that. The DE&I strategy that has been evolving actually started grassroots. It started with a group of people that we call the diversity or the dialed in crew. That was, I think it's about 50 people now who have formed a employee resource group internally to sort of address the issues that a DE&I strategy would normally go after. So that's what we've been doing for the last year, and it's working really well. And I think ultimately, the best combination is both a tops-down strategic, priority around DE&I, as well as a grassroots bottom-up approach, and all built on the foundation of a great culture.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really key point. And I know, you've said it several times, Rowan, culture. So Kelly, what about your perspective? How do you see that play out? And what are your thoughts on some of those cultural aspects?
For sure. I think to Rowan's point, we have been very proactive instead of reactive, I think, in where we've been building out this strategy, and it's because of our culture. At the end of 2019, there were already ERG groups kind of popping up. Here at Five9, we had women in technology. And then I remember at SKO, I was going to approach our people's manager, our VP of Human Resources, Trisha, and say, hey, I wish we could do some of these other things. And then she launched that we had other ERGs coming, right? And here's the process into building those. And so we were able to build out from a grassroots perspective, as Rowan shared, employee resource groups that really, where you can find a home, where any of our colleagues can find a good place for them to go. And that was also inclusive of the culture and things that they wanted to share with their Five9 community. And so I think that shares from an employee perspective how empathetic the organization is, and to Rowan's point again, tolerant around us bringing our full and authentic selves to work.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a great point, Kelly. And I think that is important, that having empathy, being able to look at how you increase tolerance. So we know as well that this month is Black History Month, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, one of the topics that I wanted to discuss with both of you here is how did the Black Lives Matter movement impact the DE&I strategy? So Kelly, why don't you start by sharing what it was like for you as you were directly involved with, Rowan talked about some of the grassroots movement in helping bring the employee perspective to the leadership team at Five9.
Yeah, well, we'll back up just a little bit and share a little bit about exactly what happened that kind of led into the Black Lives Matter movement being so impactful for us. And the reason why that is because with the killing of George Floyd, right? There's no Band-Aid on that, right? With the killing of George Floyd, it really impacted, I feel like, everyone professionally. And here at Five9, showing up and being my full self is something that I've always done, but it was very hard for myself and my colleagues to show up in this space after witnessing that murder and then after nothing happening. And so I remember Rowan actually reaching out to a community of us within the Five9 community, just checking in. And from there, we had launched a listening series that went on for like 6 weeks of like this hour-long just kind of vent session, which is completely unheard of in professional environments. We're taught in the past, just, you take who you are off when you come into the door of your corporate space, right? You give them what you need you to participate and engage in that level. And then for this to happen, it kind of accelerated our culture and accelerated the strategy that was unfolding here at Five9 around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things that happens out of that is we got a few more ERG groups. I don't want to belabor that, but then we also, at the same time, were able to say, okay, here are the things that are really affecting our employees, to be able to impact and engage with internally with our customers, and just in their daily lives. And I just am appreciative of the fact that leadership had that viewpoint. So it made it easier to have these groups that would speak up and say, hey, these are some other things that we need to do to make sure that we're continuously impactful.
Yeah, and I think you talk about the sort of being able to bring your whole self and the personal side to it. And there probably isn't anyone that didn't be able to respond to that. So Rowan, I know for you, it had a personal impact on your leadership and how you engage with the team. So why don't you share your perspective, given what Kelly shared from her side?
Yeah, 2020 was in a lot of ways, it was a tough year, but it was, also a wake-up call in this area around, with the workplace dynamics and what people of color, Black people, as well as Black people sort of face. And so what happened was, following, as Kelly mentioned, the killing of George Floyd, I met with the leadership team and we thought about, what are we going to do? And first thing we did is, we asked ourselves, what's everyone else doing? Like, if somebody else is smarter than we are, like, let's go look at what they're up to. And so we looked at that, and, there was a lot of sort of, what I saw when I looked at this, there was a lot of sort of public statements issued by big companies. And there were, there was some grandstanding around it. And what we chose to do as a leadership team is to start by listening to our employees. And as Kelly mentioned, I think she was one of my first calls to say, how are you feeling? And, tell me about your experience and what's going on for you right now. And I followed that up after talking to Kelly by talking to actually all of our Black employees at Five9. and as well as having sessions for, for the broader organization to sort of listen, as Kelly mentioned. And that was, for me, very meaningful, because there was parts of the experience that our employees had that I didn't understand and realize before spending some time with them and before listening to their stories. And I think that, again, when you have a solid culture that's tolerant and diverse, you can sort of believe that everything is good. And I think a lot of Five9 employees actually believed, hey, we're all good. We're a great culture. People have equal opportunity and everything else. And I think that was a bit of blinders. That served as blinders to sort of say there's nothing to do here. And what last year's sessions around, the listening that I did last year opened my eyes to was that actually there was a lot more that we could do. And we didn't want to pay that lip service. So we took a set of actions. And one of those actions was, let's make sure at a bare minimum, if I didn't know about the experience that a lot of our employees have, especially underrepresented minorities and our Black employees, then I bet you our other employees don't know either. And so that part, the first step in the initiative was like, let's make sure that there's an awareness amongst our employees as to how important this issue is for all of us. And that was a great start, just starting by listening and by sharing that information created, I believe, amongst, many of our employees, a much higher degree of empathy than we had before. And that's got to be the starting place for action. It can't be a corporate mandate that just comes down. It can't be we're doing it because everyone else says that it's good to do. It has to be personal. I think it'll be much more effective when it's personally felt, when there's a true understanding of what your colleagues' experiences are and a real desire to make that better for everyone. So that's how we started in 2020. And it was definitely a watershed moment for us here at Five9.
And I think, just the fact that, Rowan, you're sort of able to say that you felt as a leader you had, sort of blinkers on, or the leadership team did to an extent, not from a place of malice, but just from a place of lack of understanding. I'm sure there's people who are listening who sort of say, hey, maybe I feel like I'm in that situation as well, and my leaders don't understand me and my teammates don't understand me. So what are some of the guidelines that you give to the team to set the tone really about creating that culture of being able to bring your authentic self to work, that culture of awareness and that culture of empathy?
It starts with, so I think it has to start with, like, do people feel like they are free to express what's really going on or how they really feel? And, we had to work hard to create a scenario where that was comfortable. So for example, if you had an all hands meeting, here at Five9, we have over 1,000 employees. So if we had an all hands meeting with 1,000 employees and we said, well, let's hear from all of our Black employees. What do you think? Like, come on, like, nobody's going to stand up in that environment and really be honest. I mean, that takes a special degree of courage to do. But if you're meeting one-on-one, with the CEO in a closed environment, I'll tell you, people will share a lot more. So it starts, I think, with that personal touch and that one-on-one engagement with employees. And that has to obviously not just be from the CEO, but from all levels of management and leadership. So that's the first place I would start is, engage with employees one-on-one and listen. That's the starting place. The second thing then is, because that is not going to scale, you need to share. You need to take those stories with permission and share those stories. That's what we have been doing, is taking those stories and sharing them with our employee base to drive a level of awareness about the experience that our employees have. And then the second thing is, not just listening about the experience, but saying, well, what could we do better? And, turns out there's a ton of great ideas. I mean, we looked, again, externally and looked at other, big companies, DE&I programs and strategies and consulting groups and what they say. But the best ideas by far came from our employees, because these are the folks that are living it every day. And it turns out that the kinds of changes that we recognized we needed to make were actually fairly simple. There's definitely, we could do a lot more, but there was a really easy starting place to get into executing, the first sets of the sort of steps on the strategy that we heard directly from employees. And that made a really, really big difference.
Yep. And I think creating that safe space, if you will, whether that's because it's a one-on-one environment, I think is really important. Now, Kelly, you obviously, not just as a Five9 employee, but founder of Exposure as well, you've probably got lots of different inputs. So what would you characterize as some of those best practices, guidelines for making sure that people are setting that right tone and then having it go forward into the enterprise and into the employee base?
It is certainly, it is certainly set by leadership. As an employee and as a founder, one of the reasons why I founded Exposure is because at previous organizations, I didn't feel like I had a voice. And so I thought to myself, if I don't feel like I have a voice within this organization, then I'll create an agnostic space for people to have a voice there. And then we can do something for the collective that would benefit the masses, right? And so at any conversation that I have with leadership, it's that it starts with you. You have to set that tone for your organization that says it's acceptable to be tolerant, and not really even be tolerant. It's to be acceptable of embracing someone else's experience. The experience is just wildly different. If you didn't grow up in the same neighborhood, if you didn't go or attend the same schools, your experience in this space is just wildly different. And so once that tone is set, then you'll have employees that will come to you and share, especially if it's authentic. If your tone is authentic, you're sharing from a place of, I understand maybe, somewhere in your trajectory as becoming a leader, you understand what that looked like. And when you're authentic in that way, your employees will come forward. One of the other things that I think that is, comes a little later after you listen, after you go back and reflect, is that you have to be actionable. One of the, there's a few organizations that I talked to in the last 8 to 10 months because of everything that has pushed forward with Black Lives Matter. And they've all at least taken a stand to be actionable around increasing their strategy, creating a program, putting a group together, and allowing, and then leadership listening to what that group has to say. One of the things that came out of the listening series at Five9, for instance, is that HR is going to make a concerted effort to have more of a diverse hiring panel, right? I know we're going to talk a little bit about this in a little bit with regards to our charitable giving, but just making sure we have a diverse group of people that represent us when we're out in the field, whenever that is. But when we're out in our communities, we need to have a diverse group of people so that our community feels comfortable approaching us, right? We're approachable in that space. So I think with those few things, then as an organization, you can reflect and see what is exactly important to you and to your employees and build from there. And don't boil the ocean. You can't change this in 6 months. You can't change it in a year. This is something that people of color and Black people have had to deal with, this inequity, for a long time. So I like to also tell my leadership is to put a seatbelt on, fasten up, and get ready for it, because it's going to be something. And as long as you have continuous momentum and your initiatives are in the right space, you're going in the right direction, then you're going to grow, and your team is going to be very grateful for it as well.
Now, I like that about actionable and creating continuous momentum. I think that's a great point. Now, both you and Rowan have obviously shared the things that have worked and the things that the process that you've gone through. But it'd be interesting as well. I know when I'm listening to some of these things, I always want to know what have been some of the pitfalls, right? Or the biggest surprises maybe that have come out of the DE&I journey. So Rowan, I'll start with you. What might be some of the surprises or pitfalls, or look back and thought, hey, maybe we could have done that a little bit differently? What would you say they are?
Well, yeah, I think number one, well, first of all, surprises. I'll say, and the biggest learning for me through this process was really around the sense of belonging. And as I spoke to employees and listened to their experience, I don't think, at least I didn't understand, but I don't think most people really understand the feeling, let's say you're a Black employee coming into a conference room with 15 white people. or a black female coming into a conference room with 15 white people, right? Like if you're one of the white people, you don't think anything about it. But if you're that one black person, that is a wildly different experience. And it is the case, I believe, for many people, especially in the majority, that they've maybe never felt that kind of an experience. So that was, for me, one of the biggest learnings, that we needed to do something differently. And that wasn't, it's not something you can change quickly as sort of wave a magic wand. That's something that takes some time. In terms of what we learned about the process and what we were up to, we had a DE&I initiative going before 2020. And, we had met as a leadership team and we had actions in place. And I would tell you that I don't think that they were achieving the result as quickly as we would all like. And there was some sort of apathy about it. If you set out to sort of say, hey, look, we should have better representation of underrepresented minorities, that seems like a good thing. Diversity seems like a good thing. Well, how are you going to actually do it? And if you've got a strategy in place and, in our case, for several years, it doesn't change. Well, that could be disheartening because it sort of leaves leaders in the position that are sort of like, well, yeah, it's important, but we just don't know what to do to make it better. And that's where I think this last year, there was a lot of learnings around the grassroots efforts where our employees at the front line started picking up the mantle of responsibility and saying, hey, this is something we can all do something about. And it didn't take grand gestures from management to actually start to make some really practical changes. And that, for me, over this last year, was the biggest learning, was really encouraging a grassroots initiative will have more impact on your DE&I sort of progress than a tops-down strategy.
Yeah, sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference. And so, Kelly, I know, again, you've had a lot of experience working with teams, not just your experience at Five9, but what were some of the surprises or things that you look back and reflect on and sort of said, wow, those definitely caught me off guard?
Yeah, I'll have to start by saying, Rowan's comment about walking into a room as a Black woman or a person of color, period, when no one else in the room looks like you, is always a little bit of you have to regroup. No matter how many times you've done it, you regroup and you get prepared for what's to come. What I felt like my biggest surprise was to realize that those people in that room here at Five9 and at other organizations are my allies. And that was impactful in itself. It was an experience that before 2020 and before, this entire movement, we wouldn't have experienced, because again, we don't talk about certain things in the workplace. So to have that experience, to know that my colleagues, not only Rowan reached out, but also other colleagues reached out. Hey, are you okay? Is everything good? Do you need some time? I can pick up the slack in some projects, whatever that looks like, right? Or just joining and listening. And then, again, doing some self-reflection and figuring out what they could do in their own communities. That was really impactful and powerful for me. From what could we have done different? I think I can't think of anything. We're moving at the momentum and with the pace that I feel like a good organic grassroots strategy to DE&I should move at. You're moving at a pace that is tangible and that is going to be actionable and impactful to your organization. Because again, if you move too fast and you lose the little things that make the biggest impact within your employee community.
So then, given that, then Kelly, why don't you sort of bring us to a bit of a wrap up, and we'll ask Rowan to wrap up at the end. But why don't you say, for you, what would you like to see in the future, right? What do you want and hope that we can continue to accomplish with the DE&I strategy here at Five9?
So at Five9, my vision as we continue to build out our strategy is that we build out our ERG groups across our global footprint, and we expand on the charitable initiatives through those ERG groups. We're doing a lot of work and self-reflection within our organization. And I know that we do a little bit of giving back to our community with our Five9s Cares initiatives, but I'm hoping that towards the end of this year, going into next year, we can do more of community outreach. Today, we also, with Women in Technology, support organizations like Black Girls Code. And I think that's what I mean by charitable giving and whatnot in our space. From an exposure perspective, I really want organizations to understand that it's just as simple as we've said. It's just as simple as you literally listening to your employees and taking the feedback, applying it, and reflecting on what your company growth patterns are, and really what you want your company culture to look like, and folding in actions that are going to get you to that place where your employees can show up and be their authentic selves. Because this not only affects our corporate environment, it affects our communities in which we live. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping that these initiatives make a better place for our world, our communities. And so my children, your children don't have to have these same conversations in 20 years.
I think, that notion of just listen, reflect, apply. Thanks, Kelly. I think it's some great points. And you bring the point about, your children, as I think for me, right, as a mother, the topic of DE&I has definitely felt amplified since becoming a mother. And so I think that's a key thing, is that everyone wants to look for that future where we can treat people, with human respect for one another and work together in the community. So Rowan, as we wrap up, I guess, how would you summarize what we've talked about today? And Kelly shared with us how she'd like to see us go forward. So how would you summarize just some of your final thoughts with regards to taking DE&I forward?
Yeah, I think we've got a great foundation and we've gotten a good start, but there is a lot more that we can do. We want to continue to develop the grassroots movement. And support that movement. So I've taken on the executive sponsorship of that team and meet with them on a somewhat regular basis. I think the last thing is, and this is probably on a go-forward basis, what's going to be really important with any kind of a transformation or change in society or in an organization. There starts out with a burst of energy, and we've been riding that wave of energy and sort of activism and enthusiasm for transformation of the company. But Genefa, you've been through transformations, right? Like there's that trough of disillusionment that comes as people sort of that energy, that initial burst of energy starts to wane, and the reality starts to set in that this is going to take a long time, that there are, it's going to be hard work. It doesn't have to necessarily take a long time, but there's going to be a lot of hard work to actually make real substantial progress and change. And that trough of disillusionment is in front of us at this point. We're still, at this point, at least for our company, we're still sort of high on the activity and the energy and the enthusiasm. And as that starts to wane, what's most important for me is that we don't let that initiative slow down. And that takes active participation by leadership and by the organization. And it means that you have to get very crafty about how do you keep the energy there and keep it moving, because I want to see the kind of environment that, Kelly talked about is going to take us time to create and to learn and to go through that process. And so that could take years, and we need to have a program that sustains itself over a period of years as we continue to bite off new and bigger parts of this challenge and solve them. So that's a management challenge. It's something that we can do. We obviously are experienced at doing transformation. So I think we can take all that experience we have in business transformation and apply it to this kind of environment and cultural transformation that we need to make. If we do that, I think we're going to be in a much better position next year and the year after, and in 5 or 10 years when Kelly's kids grow up, and Genefa, when your kids grow up, when my kids grow up. I hope that this is a rearview mirror thing they'll only read about in books, in terms of what it used to be like. And if we do our jobs right, we can certainly achieve that outcome, at least for our company.
Indeed. Perseverance, I think, is the key theme, bringing from both what you and Kelly have showed. keep at it, and that can be definitely a key thing. Keep building the momentum and don't let it slide. So Rowan and Kelly, thank you very much for sharing your, being transparent, sharing what Five9 has done, what Five9 plans to do. And hopefully those in the audience who joined us have enjoyed learning and listening and are able to take some of their thoughts away and be able to share that back in their companies. So thank you both for your time, really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining the session today.
Thank you.